You got pride, you got shame, you got resentment, you have infatuation, and you have guilt. Those are the 5 states that I've isolated over the last 25 years, are the 5 primary emotional states that we hold on to. Happiness, sadness, joy, sorrow. These are all symptoms of states. But the true states are pride, infatuation, resentment, guilt, and shame. These ones constantly regulate how we function, how we feel. So as a leader, if you're stuck in a pride position, you're going to have a lot of resentment being built up, because whatever you have pride towards, eventually you resent. Whatever you have guilt or shame towards, you're eventually going to give yourself away towards. You're not going to be able to stand up for yourself, because the whole game, in my opinion at least, of leadership is to become authentic. And authentic leadership means devoid of emotion, because then you can actually be able to deal with the support and challenge of being a leader, be able to stand up for yourself and stand up for the team, and not be so afraid of the challenges that leadership is.
Welcome to Grow Think Tank. This is the one and only place where you will get insight from the founders and the CEOs of the fastest growing privately held companies. I am the host. My name is Gene Hammett. I help leaders and their teams navigate the defining moments of their growth. Are you ready to grow? Today we look at the brain inside of leadership, specifically the neuroscience of leadership. Our special guest today is Dr. T. That's the easy version of Dr. Alok Trivedi. He is Dr. Rewired, if that's easier for you as well. But Dr. T and I talk about the neuroscience of leadership from our concepts around the emotions that are getting in the way of us leading powerfully. We look at some of the interactions between our work around identity and core values, but also look at some of the differences that really different approaches are able to unlock the potential in your leadership next to what you could be doing otherwise. When I think about this conversation, I'm really kind of fascinated around his view of the brain and the impact that it has on who we are and how we lead others. And that's really what I want you to take away from this. If you're looking for the neuroscience of leadership, you've come to the right place, because we're going to dissect it and really get to the core of it in a short interview here with Dr. T. Now, if you have any questions about your own journey as a leader and you really want to take it to that next level, make sure you check out genehammett.com. That's my core website. And if you want to have a conversation with me, just schedule a call. I'd love to talk to you about what's getting in the way of you being the most powerful leader you can be. I know from my heart that when you understand what's getting in the way and how you want to move forward in that evolution, you have a much greater chance of actually becoming that leader and becoming the person that is a catalyst for growth inside your organization, not just in the company revenues, that happens, but in the people around you. If you want to have that conversation, just go to genehammett.com and schedule your call. Now, here's the interview with Dr. T. Dr. T, how are you?
I'm great, thank you. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Excited to have you on the podcast.
Well, I'm so grateful to be here. This is going to be fantastic. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
We're going to talk about the neuroscience of leadership. Before we dive into that, I'd love for you to give us the context of, what makes you the expert on this, so that we know why to listen to you.
That's a great question. Well, I can tell you that I've done this on myself and the people that I've worked with. I've had over 400,000 clients as I've gone through this process. And it's what I realized early on in practice is that patients I started having were having all these psychological challenges. And I started to ask different questions, and I started seeing different patterns in them. And then because of that, I would start seeing that their body would heal in a certain fashion. People with low back pain, they would have constant challenges with money, or someone with allergies would constantly be stressed with something else. So I started putting all these pieces of this thing together, and I started getting executives and business people, small business owners, then CEOs, then salespeople, then athletes, musicians, and then they all started kind of calling me to get more help, to help them rewire it and get more what they wanted out of their life, to get more money, productivity, business, and health. And that's kind of how this whole thing started. So that's kind of where the journey's been. It's been 25 years, 400,000 people.
I don't want to make assumptions, but you talked about some of the, like a physical doctor. You are a doctor of what?
I have my master's in physical therapy, my doctorate in chiropractic.
Okay. So you got an understanding of the body. And what I heard you say in there was you were looking and talking to people like entrepreneurs and whatnot, and you were seeing different ailments coming up, different patterns of this. What other things could you share with us, just so that we completely understand what you're talking about, these patterns?
Yeah, for example, I'll give you an example. Someone's trying to sell more, or trying to make more money, and trying to increase their sales. They couldn't get past it. They couldn't see why, and their thinking was all messed up around it. And so then they would try all the belief therapy, the NLP, all that stuff that's out there to change their beliefs and do all that. And realistically, they weren't getting any, they're doing the work, but they weren't getting the results inside of it. So then people started doing the work with me, and I would help them see the symptom of what was going on in their outer world. And their body was showing me symptoms of stress inside that. And then I started asking them questions around their business and their money and their growth and their sales. And then I started rewiring the patterns around what's going going on in their life around business and money. And then their business started to grow. Their sales started to increase. They're like, how did that happen? Well, it's all interconnected because what's going on inside of your consciousness is really what's being displayed to you on the outside. So whatever's going on, I like to say that there's two patterns of emotions that you got to think of, especially with money, is whatever you resent, you'll resist, and whatever you have guilt towards, you'll give away toward. And I'm sure we'll get into this, but there's 5 primary emotions that we go through, and these emotions govern our states, and our physiology is just dictating that from an emotional standpoint. That's all.
Well, you opened the door up. Let's go through those 5 emotions.
Well, you got pride, you got shame, you got resentment, you have infatuation, and you have guilt. Those are the 5 states that I've isolated over the last 25 years. Are the 5 primary emotional states that we hold on to. Happiness, sadness, joy, sorrow. These are all symptoms of states. But the true states are pride, infatuation, resentment, guilt, and shame. These ones constantly regulate how we function, how we feel. So as a leader, if you're stuck in a pride position, you're going to have a lot of resentment being built up because whatever you have pride towards, eventually you resent. And whatever you have guilt or shame towards, you're eventually going to give yourself away towards. You're not going to be able to stand up for yourself because the whole game, in my opinion at least, of leadership is to become authentic. And authentic leadership means devoid of emotion because then you can actually be able to deal with the support and challenge of being a leader, be able to stand up for yourself and stand up for the team and not be so afraid of the challenges that leadership brings.
You know, you said something there. I've got to kind of zero in on it. Devoid of emotions. Like I know part of my work actually is looking at emotions that are getting in the way, but also how to identify and evolve into the more empowering emotions for the right moments. But you're saying that we take out emotions?
I'm saying you devoid the emotion because when you devoid the emotion, you lose the story.
Okay.
Because all emotional stories neurophysiologically are just part of pattern inside of us. So when we actually remove the emotion, right? And what you're doing is amazing. And I love what you're doing. And it's so powerful to be able to change that story and use quote unquote a negative emotion, turn it into a powerful emotion to get them to move forward. And I think that's fantastic. I'm just going to suppose and propose that if they didn't have the emotion, they'd be able to move forward without needing the emotional up and down involved. That's what I'm proposing.
Take us through this whole concept of the neuroscience of leadership. I know we've kind of been dancing around it a little bit here, but I'd love to zero in on what do we need to know about neuroscience as it relates to leadership?
Well, I'll tell you this, is that the brain is built on 3, if I use Paul MacLean's model, you have the three areas of the brain, right? You have the lower part of the brain, which is the survival state. You have the middle part of the brain, which is the action and the limbic state, as we call it, the emotional center. And then you have the prefrontal cortex. Now, we know that the brain moves in the prefrontal cortex. We use it for long-term vision. We use it for highest energy, highest health, highest financial. But it creates a vision, a strategy, and you think more objectively from that state. Where the amygdala, for example, is the highly emotional center of the brain. And that area is always reactive. So to move from a reactive state to a proactive state, we've got to get our brain to think from the executive center. Now, we have these parts of ourselves that we all do. They're called root experiences. I call them root experiences. Some people call them traumas. That's not enough. It's a root experience. Some are positive, some are negative. Both of these states are, quote unquote, dictating the way that our brain and our patterns in our brain work. So if our brain and our blood flow is constantly functioning from the state of the amygdala, you're functioning reactively. So your vision is short term. It's not long-term strategy. It's created in a simple but reactive fashion. So it's day to day, week to week, maybe month to month, where the executive, the leadership has to think on a long-term vision, a strategy. But how do we do that, right? We have lots of tools out there to try and get us to shift that way. But if you rewire it, you actually remove the patterns and be able to move forward. I'll give you an example of this, just to give you context. If a leader has their own root experiences from their childhood, they're going to make a decision in that boardroom that is going to impact the way that the company functions, not from a strategy standpoint, simply from a root experience, which is reactive. That's an amygdala-based thing. So what I do and what we do as a team is that we rewire those root experiences so that to get leadership and leadership teams to move in a much more objective fashioned format, to be able to move with clarity and true, what I call authentic leadership.
Now, hold on for a second. Dr. T has been talking about being reactionary. Now, a lot of business owners will say, this is the normal way of business. This is who we are. And I want to say that you can actually break that pattern. All you have to do is to really look at it as you have a choice. You can be intentional or you can be reactionary. When you catch yourself in the moments of being reactionary, you can pause. You can ask yourself this key question. If we were intentional around this issue, how would it have been handled? Now, it's already too late for you to be intentional, but it gives you a chance to say, where could we be intentional in other areas? And gives you a chance to really look back and say, where did we miss the opportunity to be ahead of this? And if you ask yourself that question enough, then you know that you need to make a shift that you're probably not able to do on your own. If you have any questions about that, I'd love to help you. But this one little tool is knowing that you have choice. You don't have to just be reactionary. You can be intentional is the key because there's power in choice. Back to Dr. T. I love the work that you're doing because it really aligns with the stuff I do all the time. When you think about, what gets in the way of powerful leadership, what do you think are the top one or two issues?
That's such a good question. I mean, and I'll throw that question right back to you afterwards, right? Because I'm interested in your perspective as well. But for me, I think it really comes down to inability to devoid the emotion. What I mean by that is specifically the emotion of pride. Pride gets in the way of seeing what reality is. And the second one I think that's very important in this, that stops people from seeing it, is I think shame, because they feel guilty to their team and the people that they work for. They feel like they've gotten somewhere as a gift, not in an ingratitude state, but a state that they don't deserve it fully. And I like to say that love is the only thing that really heals, and love is the only thing that leads. And so when you love your job and you love your position and you love your employees, that's when you're the best, most authentic leader inside that as well. I'd love to hear your take on what that is too.
I have this conversation quite a bit, and I think there's a lot of things that get in the way of powerful leadership. One of the easiest, I think, for people to comprehend is the fact that they are primarily focused on managing work and not leading people. And if you understand the distinction between the two, you're able to see where you're spending your time. Talking about the project, talking about the quality, talking about the deadlines, the KPIs, all of that's managing work, and it's important. But we're never talking about confidence or fears or anything that's like more internal based that is really leading the person. And until you learn to develop both sides of these, it really does limit your power in leadership. That's the first thing that comes to mind.
I totally agree with that. And it's interesting. I kind of say it a little differently, but I think we're saying the same thing here. I like to say that you could, people say that business only takes logic, right? And there's no emotion in business, right? It's all logic. It's all logic. But that's not true, because you need emotion to engage your team. You need emotion to get people to grow and get further in their life. But logic is needed to make decision making, but emotion is needed for motivation and inspiration and leading in that capacity. I think you're right. I think it's both of them are needed.
You've mentioned a few of the emotions, and you've given some examples. One you haven't is infatuation, and because it's a great word and it's got a powerful kind of, I think, meaning from a lot of us. What impact does that have inside of leadership?
So it's such a great question. Thank you for asking this. Infatuation, when we look up to a leader that they're better than us, we now subordinate ourselves inside. We look up to them thinking that they're fantastic, they're amazing, they're so good a leader. They probably are, but we don't see ourselves and our own potential inside that. We think we're not good enough. The byproduct of that is our own internal shame, our own internal guilt. And we hide that though. Here's what we do as leaders. We hide that in pride. So infatuation, I'll use a leader that everybody knows, right? Like someone like Ali Iacocca, right? Someone everyone knows that name in leadership. Great leader, did something unique, very different. Great, fantastic. But we look to them and say what they did is something it's just different. It's not something I would do, not something I could think of. But as soon as we do that, we take away the human factor, that we're all human and we all have the ability to express and do things differently. And we're doing the same thing, just in our unique way. And when we realize that we're doing the same things in our unique way, we don't hold on to this infatuation to somebody else, therefore not putting ourselves in shame, and we can actually be real with an individual.
Dr. T, I know your company is one of the fast growth companies. You've got a group of 22 people, as you told me earlier. How are you using this stuff to really develop the people inside your own organization?
So I'll tell you, we do a lot of unique things that most people come to my company, they're like, what? We don't talk about that. First thing we do is anytime someone comes into our world, they get trained on the mission of the company. It is so important. We spend a day just drilling down the mission and how the job roles and titles of every person are linked in their brains to their mission, to that mission. So we have a company alignment that comes together. And when I work with teams, this is kind of what we do, is that we create this alignment inside. So if there's a conflict, if there's a resolution, if there's any challenges that go on, the people know, and we've neurologically rewired them to let them see what they get by working in this company. Because no person, I've said this for many years, is that no person ever worked for a company. They work for themselves. The company is the vehicle that helps them get more of what they want out of life. So we just help people get more what they want out of life, being our company, and our company helps them do that. So we link their actual values to that, and that's a whole process that I do with myself and my teams. And then the other thing, I have a tool that I created using these neurologic processes. I have 92 different ways to rewire the brain, that we do a conflict resolution tool. So we, like everybody else, have our challenges with people, and instead of trying to put them to try and apologize and feel better, we say, you know what, let's go actually use the tools, use the methodology and the work to be able to rewire ourselves so that we can see how everything that's happening to us is on the way, not in the way. So we don't have to hold on to these emotions of guilt and shame and sorrow and pride. Rather, let's just see how it helps us get what we want by integrating it in our nervous system. When we do that, conflict goes away and the energy moves forward.
We both work on the edge of different aspects of leadership. A lot of people think leadership is just, okay, let's get the work done. Let's get it done right. Let's get it done on time. Let's make money for the company. Let's continue to move forward. But you're working on the inside out.
Yes.
Fair to say, right?
100%.
When you are doing this and someone is meeting with a little bit of resistance, right? Their pride's getting in the way, their ego's getting in the way. How do you address that to get them to see how powerful from the inside out actually is?
Well, if I can be so bold enough to say on your podcast, I call them on their BS, because the only reason we hold on to that pride is to protect ourselves. And I've been doing this work with over 400,000 people, as I've said, and I've seen everything under the sun. And I've seen grown men have stories that people wouldn't believe. I've, crazy things as children and left, divorced parents, all this stuff. This is all part of who we are, part of who we employ. And if we discount that, we're making a huge mistake. If we don't take that into account, these are the people we're leading, we're taking that into a massive mistake in our leadership and the growth of our individuals. And I think a company is growth factor. And I always said that a business is the expression of the soul, and work is the expression of the soul. And I say that respectfully, not disrespectfully to sound ethereal, but rather it's the expression of who you are. And so if we look at this and say, hey, look, if an individual is meeting me with challenge and conflict, then I have to ask the question, why is that conflict? What are they protecting? And then I do what I do. My certainty exceeds anyone's doubt on this, because this is all based on science, not my opinion. I can take any person, and this is reproducible, and rewire anybody with anything. So I'm not afraid of challenging in that capacity. And then we do. And then we get them to see it. They realize it. It's like, oh, I never looked at it that way. And then we crack their shell, so to speak, and they become a much more authentic person.
I want to take you in one last direction here. I think this is all related, but you mentioned identity before. I know identity becomes something that my work actually, begins to shift, because people can understand who they are at their deepest core. When you talk about identity, what is it, and how do you actually get people to make the shifts necessary to be the powerful leaders that they want to be?
Sure, great question. I look at identity a little differently. I look at identity from the point of neurology versus psychology, right? And so when I say that, there's a place in the brain that we actually have these things that we look at called their values. And these values are not loyalties, idealism, loyalty, humility, openness, honesty. These are not not values in my world. These are social idealism, because every human being is going to be nice and kind, or nice and mean, kind and cruel, happy and sad. They're going to be both sides. And I think sometimes as leaders, what we do is we put them to sit in they can only be one way. And that's just not reality. That's not how the brain works. It's not how the body works. It's not how the human works. So when I say the identity has to shift, is that the individual, once they know what their true core values are, from that, neurologically based, and their life determines their values. Their life will find it. They act in accordance to their values. And if they don't know it, nor do you know it as a leader, you are managing the emotion and the symptom, not the person. And so when I find that, then what I do is I take them and I realize what does it identify for them? Why do they do that? And then we create their identity. And what I found that there's two different types of identity. There's a core identity of the individual, and then there's the transient identity, right? The core identities are the things that you're designed to do that's unique to you. Maybe, for example, for me, it's speaking and teaching. That's what I love to do. I'm a healer and I'm a teacher. That's what I do. That's what is my core identity. But there are other times that I have transient identity, like being a dad, hanging out with my kid, being a CEO of my company. These are all transient identities that come and go, right? I'm not a dad 100% of the time. I'm a dad when I'm with my kid, for sure. But there are other times that you're hanging out with your friends, and at that time you have a different identity. So those are transient identities that are happening. But the core identity is who you are at the source, all the time within you. That's kind of like what I think it was, Gary Keller says, your one thing, right? And that's kind of what that's how I look at it.
Dr. T, I really appreciate you sharing us some of your work, some of the insights you've had, and the stories. Really appreciate this wisdom.
Thank you so much, Ian. I appreciate the time.
Wow, what a powerful interview. I learned so much here about the emotions of this and devoiding those emotions. It really is interesting to see how other people look at the work we do to help people evolve and grow to that next level. My job is to help you be the best leader you can be. If I can help you in any way, make sure you continue to listen to these interviews. And if you want to reach out to me, I'd love to talk to you about what's going on in your own company, help you be the more powerful leader and create ownership across your company. That's what I'm known for. So when you think of growth and you think of leadership, think of Growth Think Tank. As always, lead with courage. We'll see you next time.